everyone. Welcome to our session on growing the talent pipeline for the future of food. My name is Amy Huang. I'm the University Innovation Manager here at the Good Food Institute. And I honestly could not be more jazzed about the topic of today's session. All of us here today are here because we're working together to build a field from scratch. And one major component of the foundation for every successful field, as we know, is a robust workforce, a reliable stream of well-trained talent, essentially all of the people who make everything we're trying to build here possible. So I'm really thrilled to be joined by a panel of experts in our field and adjacent fields, and of course, to be joined by all of you to illuminate the roadmap ahead for how we can go about facilitating a just labor force creation and transition. All right, let's dive into our agenda for today. So we will start off with a short presentation from GFI's very own Jen Lamy, and then we'll launch into an energizing discussion with some brilliant thinkers from across the alternative protein field. The session will roughly last for around 50 minutes, and I'll be weaving audience Q&A through the panel to the best of my ability. So if any questions arise during the course of our discussion, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. Now, I also want to remind everyone to honor our participation guidelines. So being present and engaged, practicing active listening, and being respectful to this open exchange of ideas that is so special here at the Good Food Conference. Now I would like to welcome my dear friend and colleague, Jen Lamy, to the stage. Jen is the Sustainable Seafood Initiative Manager at GFI and will be sharing a little bit about GFI's ongoing labor force analysis project, which will give us some really important insights as we look at the roadmap ahead. Jen, whenever you feel ready, please feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Amy. Yes, I'm Jen, and I will be giving a very short and sweet overview to some pretty exciting research that we're working on right now to figure out sort of the future of jobs in the alternative protein ecosystem. So I will jump right in, the next slide. And so the best way to kind of frame this is to think about where we're starting today, which is to look at sort of how big the total meat market is globally. So we say about 350 million metric tons plus probably another 150 million metric tons by 2050 with increased demand. And then take a look at that tiny, tiny sliver where alternative protein is right now on the scale of the global meat market. Fortunately, we know that the industry is growing. So on the next slide, you'll see that the plant-based industry on a global level is already growing really fast and definitely accelerating. So retail sales on a global level of plant-based meat increased by 24% over 2019 to 2020, which was a rapid uptick from the 12% increase from the previous years. And we see the same thing happening in cultivated meat on the next slide, where we can look at the number of companies in the space, which is growing rapidly, along with just looking at investment trends and the ability of these companies that already exist in the space to innovate rapidly and continue improving on the products that they're putting out there. We know that we're at the beginning of a very rapid growth trajectory for this industry over the coming decades. Next slide. So there are a lot of guesses so far about sort of how fast the industry will grow by, say, 2030 or 2050. And you can see that just on this slide that a lot of smart people are guessing pretty different numbers. So we don't have an exact number as to where we expect the industry to be in 2030. But if you take a look at that chart on the bottom right of this slide, you'll see some estimates for sort of where all of alternative protein between plant-based, fermentation-derived, and cultivated meat could land in the coming decades. And we're seeing that guess of 5 or 7.5% of the market, which is still a very significant growth in 10 years. Next slide. So the question is really sort of, what does this have to do with jobs? And I would say the answer is everything. Next slide. So we can look at the entire alternative protein value chain and really see that the workforce is an enabler of every single step. So we have people kind of behind the scenes doing the work to get us from, the very beginning of growing inputs for a wide range of products, and then to all the way to kind of the last step of distribution, of getting products to food service and retail. And there are jobs all along the way on the alternative protein side, just like there are on the conventional protein side. Next slide. And there have been some guesses as to how a growing alternative protein sector would affect jobs in the conventional protein space. And many of them are sort of segment or one market specific and not necessarily comprehensive, but do give us a good glance at what might happen. So these are the results of a Rethink X report, which looked at precision fermentation and cultivated beef and looked at the cost curves of those technologies relative to their conventional counterparts, and estimated that by 2030, we could see about half of the 1.2 million jobs in conventional beef and dairy lost, but a gain of about 700,000 jobs, so a net gain overall from these new technologies. Next slide. And if you ask farmers directly, which this Purdue Center for Commercial Agriculture survey did, you see that a lot of them do expect farmers or aggregate farm income to decrease if plant-based meat were to increase by 25% market share. So while these farmers are thinking very far in the future, since most of them don't expect plant-based meat to achieve that market share in the next few years, it is important to take that point of view into consideration and think about the fact that the people very close to the ground do see this affecting the sort of economies within which they operate. Next slide. And then if we look at sort of what a facility in the cultivated meat world looks like specifically, GFI's commissioned techno-economic analysis from last year looked at sort of how many jobs would be present in 2030 in a cultivated meat facility that produces about 10,000 metric tons of cultivated meat. So that was about 200 individuals, spanning a wide range of job titles, from lab technicians to maintenance personnel, with an average salary of about $100,000. Next slide. But all of these studies kind of get at bits and pieces, and we really need some kind of comprehensive view of what will happen to jobs. So the questions that we're curious about are what kinds of jobs are gained and how many, but also what kinds of jobs are lost and how many, and then how similar those gained and lost jobs are to each other, and what can we do to facilitate transitions between conventional and alternative protein. Next slide. And that's where our study comes in, and you can go to the next slide. So the study overview, the scope is really limited to the US, though we think global research on these topics will be immensely important, and we hope that this study will stand as sort of a first step to those global analyses. But it really does focus on sort of across meat, seafood, eggs, and dairy, and looking at all alternative protein sectors within those product types. And the first step is really to gather data on both the conventional and the alternative protein jobs markets. So for conventional protein, that's fairly straightforward with publicly available data on what sectors people are working on. But in the alternative protein sector, we're kind of building that database a little bit more from scratch, using surveys of companies along with LinkedIn analyses and job postings, and really building out an understanding of sort of how many jobs are required to produce, for example, a given volume of plant-based beef. Then second, we'll be taking that data and turning it into a model that not only shows us sort of where and what types of jobs are gained and lost, but also how similar those jobs are to each other. So we'll be able to see, in a world where we need a lot more alternative protein jobs doing X skill in Y geographic region, how similar those are to the conventional protein jobs that might be lost, and how we can therefore transition people from one to the other. And then the third step, using those results, is to really identify any interventions that need to happen. And those can really span a range of features, but there might need to be interventions both to help the conventional industry workers to find new rewarding jobs, but also to make sure that the alternative protein industry doesn't suffer from a sort of talent bottleneck as the industry grows and we need a certain skill set to advance it. Next slide. So we'll be looking at kind of a range of potential interventions, as I mentioned, and that will really depend upon sort of what the results of the study show, which we'll be seeing in another month or so. But the first, most often talked about is policy interventions. So examples where, a government can kind of intervene and provide funding for training or help people move to areas where there are a lot of alternative protein jobs. There are a lot of creative options to sort of have government help people get into this new industry. Second, of course, is education and training programs. So we will likely identify talent gaps where we really need to help people gain the skills they need, and we need to make sure that the educational system has the opportunity to train people in those skills. Third is private sector leadership. So as we see companies rebranding themselves from, for example, meat companies to protein companies, being able to then offer their employees opportunities to be retrained on some of the skills necessary for alternative protein could be a huge way for those companies to transition smoothly and really give back to their employees. And then fourth, there could be any number of other sort of interventions necessary to ensure this transition, and it will really kind of depend on the specific results of the study. Next slide. So I'll wrap it up there just by saying that, obviously the workforce development really cuts across all subsectors of alternative protein. And so if you are an industry, academic, policy stakeholder, otherwise, and you're interested in helping us to build a robust and inclusive alternative protein workforce, please consider filling out this brief survey at gfi.org/workforce. And with that, I will hand it back over to Amy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen, for framing up these important questions. I'm so jazzed for that labor force analysis to be completed so that we can have a more rigorous model for understanding, the flow of people across our field as it matures. I couldn't agree more with your last point, that workforce development really is a multi-sector, long-term endeavor that requires close coordination across a lot of different stakeholder groups. So again, to signal boost to that end, if folks are interested in getting involved in the broader picture of workforce development, do feel free to join us at gfi.org/workforce to share your ideas. Awesome. Thanks again, Jen, for your presentation. Now I would love to welcome our fantastic panelists to the stage. We have assembled a really great crew of alternative protein educators, labor economists, workforce training specialists, and industry innovators who are all working to build a robust and inclusive workforce for the future of food. We'll be discussing the topic of alternative protein workforce development over the course of the next 30-35 minutes. So audience members, if you have questions throughout the course of our conversation, feel free to drop it in the chat and I will try to incorporate it throughout our discussion. All right, well, welcome to David, Galina, Julian, Justin, and William. I couldn't be more thrilled to have you all here. I'm hoping we can first start off with a quick round of introductions. Perhaps we can start by having each of you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your expertise, and how you ultimately relate to this topic of workforce development for the alternative protein field. David, would you like to kick us off?
Sure, thanks, Amy. And hi to everyone out there. Thanks for tuning in. So I'm a professor and chair of the Department of Biomedical Engineering here at Tufts University in Boston. And my sort of connection here is we've had a long-standing program in the world of tissue engineering related to regenerative medicine. And those tools and the approaches where we've been translating over many years now to the alt protein space, and particularly cellular agriculture strategies. So we have a sort of been developing everything from coursework in cellular agriculture, which is posted online, to educating our students at the undergraduate and graduate level. And we see our role to continue to develop expertise for folks who could go out there and educate others, as well as be driving forces in startups and established companies to continue to build this really essential workforce at many, many levels.
Thank you so much, David. Galina, why don't you go next?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for including me in this panel. And the presentation was super interesting, so I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm Galina Hale. I'm a professor of economics at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I'm also a co-founder of Food System Innovations, which is basically a pro bono consulting group where we try to help everybody who needs help with big questions like this one. As an economist, my training is a macroeconomist, so I think in terms of systems, and in conversations like this, what I can contribute is kind of a big picture and things that usually people within the industry don't necessarily think about, because all the economic connections, everything is connected in the world. And so thinking about that is kind of my job. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, so happy to have your perspective represented here, Galina. That big picture view will be so helpful. All right, why don't we go next to Julian?
Hi, everyone. Yes, thank you for including me in this conversation as well. Very exciting topic. I'm the Associate Director of the Stack Family Center for Biopharmaceutical Education and Training at Albany College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences, and we're located in Albany, New York. We focus on workforce development for the biomanufacturing industry, most specifically related to biopharmaceuticals, and our efforts are supported by our mammalian and microbial bench scale laboratories. My background is in chemical engineering, more so bioprocessing and biotechnology research and development. And the majority of my research had focused on developing microalgae as a new sustainable crop for various bioproducts, including biofuels and plant-based proteins. So I have an interest in alternative proteins from that research perspective.
Thanks, Julian. Yeah, we couldn't be more thrilled to have the perspective you bring from the biopharmaceutical space applied to this discussion. I think that field has definitely gone through a lot of the motions that we're still in the very beginnings of beginning to contemplate. So it will be so informative, I think, to get your perspective. All right, now let's move on to Justin. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey everyone, great to be here. So I'm one of WildType's co-founders. We're a cultivated seafood producer making salmon. And the perspective I guess I would bring here is as an employer of people being trained by my co-panelists, I suppose. We recently and are still in the process of completing what WildType's workforce looks like in 2024. So, I'd certainly be happy to talk a little bit about what that looks like, the kinds of folks that we'll be hiring today, how that might change a few years from now, and as this entire industry continues to scale. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much, Justin. William, I think you're on mute.
Hello, everyone. I'm from Singapore. So right now it's about 1:20 a.m. So that's okay. We have in Singapore. I'm from this University of Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, one of the two fairly comprehensive universities in town. And what we have in relation to food is that we have this interdisciplinary integrated platform covering from education to research to innovation and to commercialization. So we work with industry and government agencies to drive these food tech innovations. And in my association with GFI, we actually recently had launched this new course, undergraduate level, on this future food and the introduction to meat alternative. It has been hugely popular among students because Singapore is quite unique in terms of the nature of economy and the food system. We import a lot of food from overseas, more than 90%. So there's a strong need for us to look for innovation to tighten the food system such that it'll be more efficient and rely less on food import. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, William. Excellent. It is so wonderful to have you all here. I would love for us to maybe first start our discussion at the 500-foot level. So if we zoom out, it's clear that right now we're in a pretty special point in human history. We're at the very beginnings of building a future food workforce. And what that means to me is that we have what I feel is a unique and important opportunity to do it right, and to really build the equitable workforce we know is possible and do it better than the industries that came before. So I'm hoping we can first start by just spending a little bit of time explicitly co-creating the vision for the alternative protein workforce. Justin, I'm hoping maybe you can start us off today. What, in your view, are we building together here? And what would it mean for us to do it right?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think probably one thing we could all agree on is everybody listening and participating on the panel would agree that we want a future food system that's just and inclusive, affordable, actually sustainable, and obviously one that produces really delicious products. And so as we think about what that means for our future workforce, I was noodling on this question a little bit last night, and I came up with 3 things I thought maybe that would be interesting to share. So first off, I think we need a workforce that's trained and eager to use some of these new technologies that can move us toward that future. So I'm sure we'll discuss this a lot today, but it's not really a platitude, but really a call to action, I think, for all of my co-panelists and everybody else who's training people from bioprocess PhDs like Julian to steel welders. And I really mean like we need 10 times as many people as we have today. It's not an exaggeration. So that's, I think the first point is just a lot more highly skilled people who are eager to jump into this field. The second thing that's maybe a slightly more philosophical point is I think we need to think about a system where the benefits of growth accrue to a broader base of stakeholders. So for starters, what that means is obviously ensuring that employees, and I mean all employees, are co-owners of this revolution in food production. And so they can benefit materially from the future growth that Jen was just talking about in her presentation. But a question I think we could explore is how do we go further? So how do we ensure, for example, that communities in which we locate large production sites actually benefit from this change? Can we go beyond training and employing people to actually investing in these places? I was a Boy Scout, so I'll admit my nerddom, but the motto of the Boy Scouts is to leave no trace, which I think is a great starting point for our industry wherever we are based. But can we go beyond that to actually regenerating the physical environments around our sites? And what does that imply for the workforce and the physical sites of where we're building? And then maybe the third thought to kick things off is, to the extent that there is disruption, and Jen had a slide on that, which I think is interesting. And by the way, I personally don't think that's a foregone conclusion when you look at how quickly protein demand is increasing around the world. I think there's enough growth for everybody, frankly. I think that the main thing is we just need to make sure we're not leaving traditional producers behind, both small individual farmers and large manufacturers of products. So those were the 3, I guess, implications for the workforce that I thought a little bit about as it pertains to, I think, that future that we're all trying to work toward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Justin. Do any of the other panelists want to weigh in on this question? What other considerations are at play for, the workforce we're envisioning?
So I want to add a little bit to the wonderful comments that Justin just brought in. I really like those kind of sustainability thoughts that I think if at the get-go we design an industry in a way that is sustainable. And to me, as an economist, sustainability means we're not taking anything on net from the earth, and we're not leaving any trash behind, right? So, think about the, extreme non-sustainable industry, like, a carbon produced, oil industry, right? We're extracting non-renewable resources and we're putting CO2 in the atmosphere. And neither of these aspects can go forever, right? So we want to have an industry where we are, in a sense, a closed system so we can go forever. And that kind of goes off topic, but one of the resources we're talking about is the human resource. So to think in kind of a broad way, we need to bring in labor force into the industry, but also, as Justin mentioned, we want to make sure we're not throwing away any of the groups of the population. And so in the eventual outcome that we are all working towards is to replace all animal protein with plant protein. We need to think about what kind of political pressures we would be facing, right? Right now, Jen showed the chart, we're a tiny, tiny sliver of the total protein production. And so the pushback we're facing right now is very minimal. I mean, there is, it probably doesn't feel to people in the industry, but it's nothing compared to what it would be if that blue portion would be half of the total. And so we have to be very cognizant of, and labor resources are particularly politically sensitive. So we have to be very cognizant of making sure that anybody who is losing because of that competition from alternative protein that we're trying to build is in a way has a path towards the workforce that we need for our needs.
Thank you,
Can I add a
Galina.
couple of things to that as
Yeah,
well?
please do.
Yeah, Justin, great points. Thank you for that, number one. Number two, I think embedded in all this, which is unusual, I think, for all of us, is I'll call it the urgency, right? We can't be complacent. We can't keep status quo. Change is inevitable. So it's really up to us to educate, to guide the change in the direction that's going to address the things that Gina and others just mentioned. So I think that's a really nice feature we can build on. We just have to do it well and with care, right? Number two, I think the other thing I think about is not workforce development just to get employees to Justin's company or to other startups or established companies, but there's a workforce out there that I think is sort of the underpinning of the whole field. And that may be people who go into politics, they may go into government agencies, they may go who knows where, right? And part of our obligation is to make sure we have informed, educated students at all levels who can speak the language and understand the laws to really to affect change, to make sure we move this forward in the right way. And the only other third thing I'll add, since Justin had 3 points, I have three, I guess, is I'm not sure it all has to be large factories the way we're traditionally thinking about things. I think one of the value addeds of this field is it's very scalable, from a household cell ag production facility to a mega, city facility. So I think that is an advantage, again, that we need to build on and think about scaling and make sure, this allows us to be more equitable and more distributable, but it has to be done in an economic way as well. So anyway, thanks.
Thanks so much.
May I just add a few points from Singapore's perspective?
Please
We
do.
look at this new development in the alternative protein as a very exciting development, but we sort of like to put this in the context of entire full value chain, so that the education and preparation for workforce also ought to be more interdisciplinary in nature, so that more people can actually be aware of the need to the change in the food system. And we see that, for example, it's not just about food technology development, but also supply chain, and for example, from the farming side, whether the trade-off is there for farmers, smallholder farmers, which is very predominant in Southeast Asia, whether they can benefit from this change in the food system as well. So interdisciplinary is one thing. The second thing would be perhaps look at the lifelong learning. So we have this curriculum which covers not just at university level, but also in the specialization field, Ph.D. And also we have this course for prepare the current working professionals. If they want to move into this a new field, then there will be actually a course available for them. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, William, and thank you all of our panelists for weighing in on this question. I think those are all really important keywords for us to keep in mind as we design this future food workforce. I would love to take us down a layer of abstraction and hone in on the question of forecasting talent needs, which I think is really going to be pivotal for informing the decisions of educators and policymakers and other stakeholders who are part of this creation of the flow of people throughout our industry. So maybe we can start with Justin here. What kinds of talent gaps are you seeing today in the future food workforce? And how might you see these talent needs evolving in 5, 10, 20 years as you envision staffing an industrial or commercial scale facility?
Yeah, good question. And forgive the proximity bias. Our minds always go to the thing that's, you know, top on our list these days. And for right now, that's bioprocess people. So Julian, please train more people quickly. And look, first of all, that level of training and people who have industry experience is, you know, are incredibly valuable. But the thing I've been thinking about is, do I really at WildType want to, so to speak, cannibalize therapeutics companies who are maybe working on the next vaccine for the pandemic that is around the corner? That's not great, right? We need sort of a rising tides lift all boats, and therefore just more people who know how to grow cells, who know how to do precision fermentation, who know what it takes to, you know, to scale these kinds of things to way beyond bench scale. So that's the proximate thing that's on my mind this morning. As we look a little bit further out, I think there are a few things that will change. First of all, we'll go from a field with, as a percentage of our workforce, a lot of PhDs into one where there's a lot more focus on manufacturing, on distribution, and really great communication. You know, at least in the next few years, is we're helping people understand what exactly is this technology. It's not plant-based. It didn't come from a dead animal. How does this work? Right? That's all of our job. I think we'll go from having one site to having multiple highly distributed production sites around the world. There's an open question about what is that minimum efficient scale at which this industry will work best. I think that's yet to be determined. And I think we'll go from a world in which innovation is the major focus to one where it's about execution and cost competitiveness to make these products more accessible, more affordable. That's not to say that we'll have fewer PhDs, that we won't be focused on innovation, but we'll have to walk and chew gum at the same time, so to speak, and do both really well on the commercial front and on the innovation front. So that's how I think about sort of the immediate need, and then maybe things a little further down the pipe.
Thanks, Justin. Do you have a best guess around when there might be this tipping point from needing more high-level scientists and engineers to needing more technicians to power the scale up of your plants?
I'd say fewer than 2 years. Honestly, it's soon. So there's not a lot of time to create new curricula, and obviously we need to do that and invest in a really deep system. But us, and I know many of our fellow companies are scaling really dramatically, and our need for talent is I wouldn't say dire, but pretty extreme. And so, yeah, the time is really of the essence here.
Thank you so much, Justin. Yeah, I also really appreciate the point you made earlier on about not just intercepting existing talent streams, but really growing the pie, increasing the pool of talent that might flow into all of these high impact industries. Julian, I want to pivot to you at this stage, because I'm really curious about the perspective you might bring to this question, coming from an adjacent industry that's gone through a lot of these motions already. What are some of the key learnings or important considerations that we can borrow from the biopharmaceutical space as we think about the talent needs and how they might evolve as our field matures?
Thanks, Amy. That is a great question, one I've been thinking about as well. So certainly see parallels between biopharma and the alternative protein space. And in very broad brush strokes, the pharmaceutical industry originally focused on small molecule drugs, but through advances in biotechnology, now here we are manufacturing biopharmaceuticals, which are significantly more complex biomolecules like antibody therapies, vaccines, and even beyond that, moving into cell and gene therapies, which are vastly more complex living products. So I think that really the interface of disciplines has always been an exciting place to be, and that seems like where we're living right now and are in the biopharma space as well. So in biopharma, this convergence of biology and manufacturing technology is always advancing continually. And with that comes not only a need to train the workforce, but also to retrain employees to remain current on technology. So that is a main focus of our center and many other training centers in the biopharmaceutical space, to offer short programs to reskill and upskill individuals from the existing biopharma workforce, but also related fields. So like we had mentioned before, not cannibalizing other fields, so to speak, but giving more opportunities for those that want to pivot. So being in a pharmacy school, we see pharmacists as an example of a very talented workforce with a growing interest in moving into the manufacturing side of biomanufacturing industry. And we offer a pathway for them to do that. So we also train individuals who may have more experience in traditional small molecule pharmaceutical manufacturing who would like to learn biology, bioprocessing, and move into that space. Another key learning, so to speak, would be that the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry is a very highly regulated industry, as is the food industry. So any biomanufacturing training program really should emphasize regulatory and QA/QC aspects to give that full spectrum of what's needed, not just on the lab bench, but there's a lot more to manufacturing. So the way to accomplish this, and the way it's done in biopharmaceutical training, is not the type of learning that is done with textbooks alone. I think we all agree that hands-on experience in a simulated environment that has the latest industry-relevant platforms that one would actually see in a biopharmaceutical company or a cellular agriculture company is really the way to accomplish that, and that's what we've learned.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julian. I think especially this idea of creating skills pathways that are adaptable kind of borrows on the point that William made earlier, that if we're to create jobs in the alternative protein field that are in fact good jobs, we need to increase the optionality that people have and be able to train them to have skills that they can port from one role to another. Awesome. So now that we have a little bit of a sense of what the talent gaps look like now in our field and might look like into the future, I would love us to kind of center our conversation around what it might actually look like to close these talent gaps and overcome these potential future talent bottlenecks. So we have seen, as David and William have mentioned, some of the first dedicated alternative protein courses and programs come online over the past couple of years, positioning academic institutions like Tufts and NTU as leaders for cultivating the next crop of alt protein talent. So I'd love for us to just zoom in on some of the efforts that are underway on university campuses. David, maybe you can start us off by telling us a little bit about the activity going on at Tufts, and William, I'd love to hear some background at NTU as well.
Great, yeah. So I think the team of students here a few years ago put together our first formal cell ag course, and the first course was about 2.5, 3 years ago. And the first course was a laboratory course. So we ran the course for a while, then we ran into COVID problems, obviously. So we put the course online and proved to be really a very receptive audience out there because we made it available to anybody. And the goal was kind of living courses as other people use things, add things to it and make it more dynamic. And so now we have a couple of regular courses, both lecture-based and lab-based, taught every year. and the student demand is through the roof, which is great. And so I think these will continue to grow. I know here at Tufts University, we are finalizing our first formal graduate certificate program, which is more of the high end. So Justin won't fill the needs after a couple of years, but nonetheless get some folks well trained in the area. They could be retrained from industry coming in. They take 4 courses and go on from there. And our goal is to build a graduate program based on cell ag as well, and that's in process depending on a lot of things. I will add, so the momentum is there, and the students involved are also those who are putting together the courses, which is really nice because a lot of them come from working in the alt protein field. They bring knowledge, they're all very smart and motivated, and this allows this sort of confluence of experiences to really address, at least from the academic side, what we think the needs are. I will say there's still a huge gap, and I don't know how this is going to be filled because I think everyone knows that there's been very, very little government, at least in the US, government funding support for training for students at any level in this field. It's too new. It's been driven by industry, which is great, but there's a huge gap there. And I haven't seen a lot of momentum to fill that gap. So I think there needs to be some efforts to convince funding agencies, from whether it's NSF, USDA, NIH, you could go down the list, that this is really an important factor to build an equitable workforce that can really address the needs in industry. And I think together, as a team, we need to really foster this because, by the time we get that support, poor Justin's on to the next phase and he doesn't need this anymore, right? So there's got to be some balance and coordination here. And I think that can happen, but we need to be vigilant about that going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, David. One quick follow-up question. What do you think it would take to get funding agencies and policymakers on board? I'd love some insight as to how we can more effectively mobilize these stakeholders in service of, this broad project of workforce development for an emerging field.
Yeah, I'm not a politician, so I don't want to go there, but I think the companies that are desperate for help today and the projections like GFI showed in terms of where the workforce is needed, where the growth of this industry is, somehow that information needs to get to policymakers who then drive budgets at federal agencies. But that's not my skill set. Maybe Gina has a better idea there, or William in Singapore. We'll talk to anybody that wants to listen, but we only hit a small fragment of the population, and we don't really hit the policymakers and those making budget decisions at the larger agencies. So we need everyone to help here. And I think GFI and New Harvest and others can play a big role here, right? As sort of catalysts to get the information out, as you've been doing, and to talk to folks.
Thanks, David. Let's shift over to the Singaporean context. Can you tell us a little bit about the programs that you have underway, and maybe with a focus on, what types of education and training programs, in addition to what you guys have been looking at, we need to be building as an ecosystem to fill some of these talent gaps?
Right. Well, that's a great question. Well, as I mentioned earlier, actually, this talent development for the food space, novel food industry, is fairly, it's fairly interdisciplinary. In fact, when we talk about talent development, we always think of the students. In fact, but the trainers actually, we also need to be retrained, So it's not just limited to it's not one dimension, but it's multidimensional. And so what we have done so far quite successfully, as I mentioned, is an integrated platform. So actually, through research and innovation, we develop simple and cost-effective innovations, which attract the industry to come to campus. We have a number of joint lab with the food industry on the campus. So that's provide a very conducive environment, not just for students, but also for people like myself to really see what is the real world needs and how we can fill the gap and what kind of a missing gap are there so that we can actually adjust the talent development accordingly. But I agree with Julian's point that retraining, upskilling is very important, because when we talk about food application, in my perspective, is a lot is to apply what we learn from other fundamental training, like tissue engineering towards cultivated meat, and chemical engineering towards process scale up. So it's a lot of apply, and interdisciplinary type of collaboration will actually make a real impact in terms of not just talent development, but also push for the growth of industry. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for those insights, William. Just keeping an eye on time here, we have just a few minutes left together. I really enjoyed this conversation. There's one question that was surfaced in the audience Q&A that I'd like to ask our panelists here. One of the key opportunities that we have in building a workforce from scratch is building career pathways for underrepresented communities who maybe historically have been marginalized or excluded from agriculture and STEM fields, and don't have clear on-ramps into many tech-driven industries, the alternative protein field not being an exception there. So what can we as a sector be doing to build towards a more diverse and inclusive workforce, building a just and equitable talent pipeline that flows into our field? Any panelists is welcome to hop in here if you have any thoughts.
Well, I can start to kick it off while others are thinking. I think one key point here is to be intentional about it, right? Reaching out, so that in terms of the highly skilled, educated talent that we're building, it's not only drawn from the elite universities, but also from the schools globally that, it doesn't have to be just the US or, Western countries or highly developed countries in Asia, but there are good universities all over the world. And within, developed rich countries, there are universities that serve underrepresented minorities, and trying to focus the training programs in those universities, which actually might be easier in many respects because they do not have as many opportunities, and they might be willing to jump onto the opportunities like that, would be a way to, as you mentioned, Amy, and other speakers we're talking about the generational transition. And so looking forward to the generation of, undergraduate high school students right now, these are students we can reach at this point and give them an opportunity to train for this workforce that we need.
If I could add to that, I think someone mentioned earlier, more in a manufacturing context, developing things in a distributed fashion. But I think from a training perspective, also expanding that in a decentralized manner can be very important. From biopharma and biotech, we have some hubs in the United States, at least, but the food industry has a very different footprint. So motivating stakeholders from broad geographies would be an important objective to attract a wide variety of people for the workforce.
Yeah, I just add, I can't remember who mentioned it, I think it was maybe William, that, this is a convergence topic, right? So you could be attractive to students from underrepresented communities, whether they're interested in ecology, to engineering, to scale up, to politics, it doesn't matter. Everyone plays a role in this field. So I think making sure the field presents itself as that inclusionary opportunity brings everyone in a lot easier way than just saying, okay, we're just doing X or just doing Y. So I think the education process starts at the very young level, and part of our mission and others is not only educate, undergraduates and graduates and postdocs, but also get the word out so that there are YouTube channels and there are, platforms for teachers to use at, K through 12 so that they can show all students anywhere that there's roadmaps to bring their interest into this field.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think that's a really powerful idea, the need to create both formal and informal pathways into the alternative protein field to account for a diversity of backgrounds and potential on-ramps. Justin, I saw you hop off mute. Do you want to contribute some thoughts here?
Just very briefly to Galina's point, which I think is an incredibly good one. At WildType, we've been very intentional about this, but I think there's a matching issue, right? Where people who we're looking for may not see our job ads. Maybe they don't have a LinkedIn presence, that maybe they don't know about Indeed or ZipRecruiter. And so we've been trying really hard to, find these pockets of people, but the matchmaking problem is also on our side because we don't know where those pockets are and like what tools we can use to get there. And so some kind of, there's a comment about a bridge in the chat. I think that needs to happen somehow, where we can help connect employers with people who may not even know that they want to work in this field, but when they hear about it, they're like, yes, that is for me for so many reasons. And so that is, unfortunately, just a real point of friction in the recruiting world today. Is like how do we connect with the right people efficiently in a way that doesn't, require an army of people and on the talent team.
I just like to add on Singapore's perspective. We are really a very tiny, small city state. So the way we see it is more like enhancing regional collaboration. So we work with companies that are based in Indonesia, in Thailand. Sometimes we have this technology, collaboration. And through this collaboration, we also move on to develop talent. We give courses to Indonesian student university, and then we go to help students from China to get some update on this novel urban farming system. So it's very porous, and then once we sort of fuse the technology industry engagement with the education, I think it's very natural that organic growth will see them naturally to happen. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for contributing your insights to this question and to our entire discussion. Before we wrap up today, are there any final thoughts that you'd all like to share with our audience? I feel like this conversation is ending super prematurely because I have dozens of questions just brimming off the top of my mind. But any last thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with before we wrap up our session?
I would just give a very short conclusion from Singapore's perspective. I think food system is global. We can see the how COVID-19 pandemic has an impact on the food system overall. So I think these will call not just interdisciplinary type of collaboration, but also global collaboration. And so only then we can actually make the food system better and more efficient. Yeah.
Thank you so much, William. Any final parting thoughts?
Maybe just a big thank you from my side to all of the hardworking educators who are preparing people for this field. Our field would not be successful without you. So I know often teachers are not always thanked, but I'd like to thank you at least on behalf of all of us at WildType.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, it has been so just gratifying to see the swell of alternative protein courses and programs that have started to emerge throughout the world. And really excited, to your point, William, to see a global community of educators and companies and governments work together to see this project of workforce development forward. All right, that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you again to all of our speakers, panelists, and attendees for your very thoughtful contributions. For the rest of you, please be sure to visit gfi.org/workforce and check out the resources linked below this session. It has been a true joy to moderate this panel today, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of the Good Food Conference. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.